The Civil War had ended, but the battle for America's soul was just beginning. The South lay in ruins, its economy shattered, its people divided, and its future uncertain. How do you rebuild a land torn apart by war, where old loyalties clash with new freedoms? Welcome to Reconstruction Unveiled, the struggle to rebuild a divided South. In this video, we'll uncover the untold stories of a nation grappling with freedom and power, where former slaves fought for rights, Confederate leaders faced exile or redemption, and a fragile peace hung by a thread. From the fierce political battles in Washington to the quiet resilience of everyday people, the Reconstruction era reshaped America forever. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of history to reveal the triumphs, tragedies, and tensions that defined this pivotal chapter. This is not just a story of the past, it's the story of how a divided nation struggled to heal and redefine itself. Don't miss a moment of this gripping journey into the heart of Reconstruction. Union troops neither dominated nor mistreated the defeated Confederates. President Abraham Lincoln instructed Union officers to show full military courtesy, saluting both officers and enlisted men upon surrender. However, radical Republicans in Congress, aiming to punish the South for slavery and rebellion, opposed Lincoln's lenient policies. On April 9, 1865, Grant permitted all Confederate soldiers to keep their personal belongings and horses. Although other Confederate forces surrendered in the following months, the Appomattox ceremonies marked the definitive end of the Civil War. The South lay devastated by the conflict, with generals like William Tecumseh Sherman conducting scorched-earth campaigns that destroyed infrastructure and dismantled the plantation economy. Lincoln advocated for a swift and peaceful reunion. He proposed a general amnesty for those who had supported the Confederacy and suggested Southern states be readmitted once 10% of a state's voters took an oath of allegiance to the United States. This threshold was deliberately set low to encourage quick reintegration. The federal government faced the challenge of reintegrating former rebels and reestablishing state governments. However, radical Republicans rejected this approach, demanding that 50% of voters swear loyalty before readmission, a requirement that would have effectively barred Southern states from rejoining the Union anytime soon. Lincoln's plan was interrupted by a political stalemate with radical Republicans and shattered by John Wilkes Booth's assassination of Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Following Lincoln's death, the fortunes of the former Confederates changed, as Andrew Johnson Hunt, South Carolina, where the conflict arguably began, had to issue bonds worth $300,000, reduced to ruins described by Union General Charles Schurz as a vast, blackened scar of devastation. Confederate President Jefferson Davis attempted to flee as well, but was captured again, giving the man another chance to face the Yankees. However, Mexico was a country without slavery, an institution deeply cherished by many former Confederates willing to settle there, hoping to utilize Southern expertise in cotton farming combined with local slave labor. Around 20,000 Confederates accepted Pedro's invitation, founding the town of Americana, about 260 miles from Sao Paulo. The war consumed 2/3 of the South's wealth, leaving what was once a prosperous agricultural region unable to sustain its people. Fences were gone. Solitary smokestacks surrounded by ashes marked where homes once stood. The destruction was immense. A system developed where Southern cotton owners could avoid seizure by swearing loyalty to the Union, often through collusion with Treasury officials. Consequently, some cotton was sold off by agents for personal gain. While most Southerners returned to rebuild their shattered lives, many refused to accept the new social order or risk persecution for their wartime roles. Several Confederate leaders fled abroad. Secretary of State Judah P. Benjamin found refuge in Britain before dying in Paris, while Secretary of War John C. Breckinridge returned home only after receiving a pardon. Brazilian Emperor Dom Pedro II offered affordable farmland and refuge to any Confederates willing to settle there, hoping to capitalize on Southern expertise in cotton. Fortunately for them, the Empire of Brazil shared this attachment. The settlers found Brazil hospitable, with one immigrant remarking, "The battle-weary soldier, the grieving parent, the oppressed patriot, the homeless and dispossessed could find shelter from slavery in 1888, and despite criticism of the Americana project by prominent rebels as scenes of sorrow and death. To this day, the people of Americana honor Confederate memorials among Northerners. Although Davis was never charged with crimes against the United States, he faced an initial indictment for treason, but his case was dismissed due to Union insistence. Wealthy planters and Confederate leaders were compelled to formally and publicly petition for clemency, essentially pleading Washington for pardon. Confederate President Jefferson Davis was over $20,000, equivalent to about $370,000 today, were excluded from pardon. This policy remains and preserves a deep respect for 19th-century Southern culture. Even after Brazil abolished slavery, despite these displays of authority, President Andrew Johnson largely continued Lincoln's lenient approach to Reconstruction, often allowing states to rejoin the Union with minimal federal interference. Johnson declared that North Carolina could seek readmission once it had drafted a new state constitution and formed a government loyal to the Union, removing the prior requirement for loyalty oaths. By the 1865 election, former Confederate Vice President, 4 generals, 6 cabinet members, and 58 congressmen had returned to Washington. Throughout the South, candidates frequently highlighted their Confederate service on election ballots to attract votes, with some proudly wearing their old uniforms in legislative sessions. Yet many Southerners, including notable Confederate General James Longstreet, joined the Republican Party, advocating for Reconstruction and openly criticizing his former commander, Robert E. Lee, whenever possible. Longstreet expressed that the war was made upon Republican issues, and it seems to me fair and just that the settlement should be made accordingly. He eventually aligned himself with the government to promote national unity and Reconstruction. James Longstreet faced an indictment for treason initially, but was kept shackled under heavy guard while authorities deliberated on charges against him. Many former Confederate leaders leveraged their state's readmission as a pathway back to political influence. Others, senior Confederate officials, faced treason indictments. One Confederate officer, Henry Wirtz, was executed for war crimes related to the appalling conditions at Andersonville Prison. Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, during their lifetimes, were notable exceptions. This stance on Reconstruction earned him the label of a traitor among most Southerners. White Southerners, regardless of their personal views on Reconstruction, found it unbearable to see their lands occupied by federal troops, many of whom were black soldiers. They resented this presence, viewing it as an affront to white supremacy in all facets of daily life. The administration established schools and hospitals, mediated labor contracts between employers and freedmen, but the actual number of federal troops stationed in the South was relatively low. In reality, the rapid restoration of state governments under President Andrew Johnson's administration meant that federal troop presence was limited. Black individuals were forced to enter labor contracts that effectively bound them to their employers in a form of indentured servitude, with employers granted the authority to arrest workers who left before their contracts ended. Established shortly before the Civil War concluded, the Freedmen's Bureau was created to assist refugees of all races, especially newly freed slaves. Although slavery had been legally abolished, Southern states were determined to uphold white supremacy by enacting black codes, laws that severely restricted the rights of African Americans and kept them in conditions nearly identical to slavery. the government returned confiscated lands to their original Confederate owners, leaving freed African Americans with very little land of their own. Reconstruction's extension of voting rights to black citizens was viewed by many Confederates as merely a Republican scheme to ensure one-party control. The federal government, particularly the Republican-led Congress, recognized these black codes as attempts to revive slavery under another name, a situation they found completely unacceptable. The fear Southerners felt about their social status was intensified by the presence of black troops, which they considered a deliberate insult. Southern states reorganized their governments and passed black codes that granted rights on paper but imposed harsh limitations in practice. President Andrew Johnson pressured the Freedmen's Bureau to return confiscated lands meant to be distributed as 40 acres and a mule to freed workers. However, the Bureau was forced to comply with Johnson's demands, undermining efforts to provide land and support to emancipated people. While the Bureau achieved greater success in establishing schools and hospitals, treating hundreds of thousands, and educating many first-generation students, these efforts clashed with the values of the re-established Southern state governments, which made clear the Bureau was viewed as a foreign imposition supported by an occupying force. Many former Confederates openly declared it an enemy of Southern sovereignty. By 1866, President Johnson had become an adversary of the Bureau, vetoing an extension of its funding and effectively crippling the organization. In the absence of federal supervision, former Confederates began enforcing black codes within their borders. Informal violence occurred, with some violent groups growing so strong that federal troops were eventually withdrawn by Congress in 1872. The majority of confiscated land was returned to white elites. The Bureau was ultimately closed down. Though the Freedmen's Bureau faced numerous challenges, it played a vital role in aiding formerly enslaved people during Reconstruction by promoting education, mediating labor contracts, establishing schools, and managing confiscated or abandoned lands. It also provided food, shelter, clothing, and medical care to displaced Southerners, including newly freed African Americans. Despite its ambitious goals, the Bureau struggled due to limited funding, short operational timelines, and political opposition, especially from President Johnson, who vetoed efforts to extend its mandate. Its commissioner, Major General Oliver O. Howard, sympathized with freed people and resisted Johnson's attempts to return land to former Confederates. But ultimately the majority of land was restored to white elites. Where did those 400,000 ex-Confederates go? Some rebuilt shattered lives amid the ruins of the South. Others sought refuge across borders in distant lands like Brazil, while many quietly slipped back into society, forced to face the challenges of a transformed American society, forever changed yet determined to survive. The story of Reconstruction is far from over. It's a chapter of American history filled with unfinished battles, hidden truths, and lessons that still echo today. As we've seen, the struggle to rebuild a divided South was not just about politics or land, but about identity, power, and the very meaning of freedom. So, what do you think? Could America have healed faster if different choices were made? Or was this struggle inevitable? And how do the echoes of Reconstruction still shape our society now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into the untold stories of history. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep uncovering the past that shapes our future.